going to talk about human rights and global supply chains. And before we kick off with our panel discussion, I'd just like to start by giving a bit of an overview around the changing legal landscape. And I think this changing legal landscape is really leading to changing stakeholder expectations as well, which I'm sure all of you are experiencing in your businesses and in your work. You can see behind me an overview of some of the changes just in the last less than 10 years, really, in terms of legislation that is impacting businesses and human rights in supply chains, specifically focused on modern slavery and forced labour, but also broader human rights issues. So you can see there, back in 2015, the UK brought in the Modern Slavery Act, which Australia now has one as well. And this is essentially reporting legislation that requires businesses to report on actions they're taking to identify and address modern slavery risks in their supply chains. Over in Europe, we've seen a raft of legislation coming through in France, Germany, Norway, the Netherlands, and also now Canada, looking at broader human rights due diligence issues. Now, for those who don't think about these things every day like me, the difference between these two types of legislation, one, the Modern Slavery Acts are just asking you to report on what you're doing, and the human rights due diligence laws are actually requiring you to take action. So there's a positive obligation there for businesses to look through their supply chains, figure out what's going wrong, and take action to mitigate, prevent, and remedy human rights abuses in their supply chains. And now this is really important. So I mentioned several of those European countries that have introduced human rights due diligence legislation recently. In just the last month, the European Union passed the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which will actually require all EU member states to pass human rights due diligence laws. Now, I think what's interesting for this panel is how is that going to impact businesses in our region? So while none of the businesses, well, some of the businesses here probably do report under that legislation or will have to report, but many of the businesses will not, but they will still be impacted. And if I just take Sri Lanka as an example, the EU is Sri Lanka's second largest trading partner. So 22.4% of exports are going to the EU. That includes apparel, tyres, tea and tobacco. So what's going to happen when these EU laws come in? What's going to happen to the largest European businesses that are sourcing from Sri Lankan companies? They're going to start asking questions. How do you look for human rights risks in your supply chains? What do you do about it? How do you prevent risks? How do you provide remedy? And so as these laws come in over the next 2 years, it's going to be absolutely critical for businesses in Sri Lanka, as well as across the Asia-Pacific region, to start taking action to prevent these abuses from occurring in their supply chains. I think the consequences of not taking action are fairly clear. These European companies, if they are not complying, they're up for penalties reaching up to 5% of their global turnover. So it's something they're going to take seriously. It's something that they're going to be asking their suppliers to take very seriously as well. So I think with that in mind, I'd be really curious to hear from the panel about how you see this impacting your businesses and supply chains. Other measures that we've seen come in recently in the US have been import controls. So we know the US has a tariff act which prevents you from importing goods that are at risk of being made with forced labour, and they actually have the power to seize goods at the border if those goods have been made with forced labour. And we've seen a number of examples of that impacting businesses in very serious financial, commercial, operational ways. To give an example, there was a Malaysian rubber glove company recently who was issued with a withhold release order under the US Tariff Act, and this led to Malaysian rubber gloves being seized at the border and actually banned from coming into the US. It was estimated to result in a loss of potentially $750 million US dollars in glove export revenues. And to lift the ban, the company paid over $30 million in remediation to workers and to improve working and living conditions in their supply chains. So you can see as these laws come in, they are starting to have real financial, legal and commercial consequences for businesses. The EU directive, as I mentioned, will result in companies in Europe scrutinising supply chains much more closely, and it will require businesses across the region to take far greater action if they want to maintain market share in Europe. I'll turn to our panel now to start with some questions, and Denver, perhaps if I can start with you. You are part of a global technology services company, and you've undertaken a number of efforts to drive sustainability throughout your supply chains. Can I ask you to share with us a little bit about what this changing legal landscape means for you and how you're responding to that as a business?
So thank you very much. First, I would like to thank the Capital Maharaja Group and the organizers of this summit and conference for inviting us over here, and delighted to be a part of this distinguished panel. And thank you, Serena, for directing the question. So let me begin by trying to define the purpose of Virtusa. And that goes beyond technology. It's our core values. So Virtusa was founded on its core values of what we call Pearl values of passion, innovation, respect, and leadership. Anchored on that, we embarked on a journey of taking accountability and responsibility for our environmental, social, and governance footprint. We do so by enabling all our stakeholders, customers, investors, team members, to have a purpose with a passion for people and planet. And in doing so, we are driving the value chain proposition of ensuring that we are able to materially measure and manage these numbers. It also helps us in reporting to global standards like the Carbon Disclosure Project on the environmental side, and on the social, EcoVadis, that has the environment, social. And these gives you a guideline. We have a very robust framework, sustainability framework, covering from environment, health, safety, anti-bribery corruption, business and human rights, modern-day slavery, etc. And these are the policies under which you govern. And the way we did that was every functional head took accountability for the policies that they co-own or they own, and thereby the matrices. Now, why did I talk about all these Virtusas, policies and things? Is because these policies are what drives commitments from our supply chain to adhere to. And these are the ones that we portray to our customers and investors as our credentials of doing what is right. A purpose-driven company that is enabling us, our stakeholders, our supply chains to be future-proofed. So that is sort of a very overview of how we have done it, how we are driving it, and it's there. Coming to your question of regulatory mechanisms, we see ourselves reasonably ahead of the curve. We have invested in doing what is right. I would say most of the certifications we did what was right, and by the way, the certifications came along. So we are not audit shy, we are not transparent shy, we are not accountability shy. We are committed to sharing that. Even to the extent of labor regulations that have been, or lawsuits that have come, we have transparency about these aspects as well, that customers, if they so want, they can dig into, right? So when you start doing that, you start being a cut above the rest, which actually makes business profitable, sustainable, and future-proofed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kush, I might turn to you now, if that's all right. Mr. Kush Kumar Joshi has been a barley process business leader for Nepal for quite some time now. You are one of the originals, and I think there are many original barley process business leaders here today. In addition to running Nepal Ekarat Engineering, or NEEC, you're a barley process business leader, but you also head up the National Business Initiative in Nepal. Can you share with us a little bit about this and how companies are engaging with it to prioritize respect for human rights?
Thank you, Sharon. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the Mr. Sepan Daniel and the Maharaj Group of Capital Maharaj Group of Industry in Sri Lanka for hosting this beautiful summit here, and back up by the Bali Process Government Business Forum, Dr. Newsfirst. It's such an interesting, knowledgeable, and experience sharing moment for us. Is coming to the point to National Business Initiative, what it is exactly. Business and the society is the two side of the coin, I suppose. So society demands, business supplies. If business is responsible, then society can be also responsible. That's why in the National Business Initiative, what we say is there can be no successful business without successful society, and there can be no successful business society without successful business. That means if we do the responsible business practices, then the society can also respond, the responsible society act as in that one. In the business, we know the modern slavery is going on, trafficking going on, that is there. Once I happens to be in the Bali process in Indonesia, in Indonesia, then I found, yes, these activities going on every time. We acknowledge that one, of course it's going on. And how do you react from a company? Yes, we are reacting on that one. And how do we advancement on that one also to my supply chain? That also we are doing something, but that is just organized setup what we are doing it. But through the National Business Initiative, we are trying to institutionalize the momentum, this process, through the AAA recommendation, what we are trying to do with our members in the National Business Initiative. So we said, of course, Nepal, as of course you said, is the maximum labor migration country in the world, I can say. Our maximum GDP growth is from the remittance. Around 4 million people are outside in Nepal. We have around 30 million population in Nepal. 4 million is outside all the time. So government is emphasizing on the remittance-based economy, which is not exactly correct for us. We always encourage the government to be a source mobilization from the country so that we can export our products, we can substitute the import-based things so that we can generate more employment in Nepal itself. So these things are going on in the country, so where NBI is trying to focus how we can really do the responsible business practices to our employees so that they cannot go, they don't have to go to the other country for this one, so that the gray area is creating from the human trafficking, which can be reduced. So this AAA recommendation, the toolkit which we are trying to do in our member of the institution, we form the RBA, in Responsible Business Alliance Network, where we have around more than 40 companies enrolled. And that 40 company, I think they employ around more than 50,000 employees. So from that point of view, we are trying to establish the toolkit to the company where they can practice this acknowledgement, act, and the advancement on that one. That's why we try to do through NBI the responsible business practices to our company, so that this modern slavery, which is existing all the time, because as previous speakers in the first session also said, the most profitable business in the world is trafficking, human trafficking. So business cannot deny to reduce that one. But if the business can be responsible, as Mr. Andrew Forrest said, if we are ethical business practices, if your business is responsible, then we can reduce this kind of momentum. We can reduce the thinking process of the people, of course, not to do the human trafficking, but to engage in our own company through the responsible business practices, what we are trying to do from NBI. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kush, for sharing that. And I know you ran a huge event last year with the National Business Initiative, which Walk Free attended, and we really got to see my team got to see how that works in action and how you really work with the business community, bringing them together with government to get those key messages across and to foster the collaboration that's needed to tackle those issues. Mr. Nizam, thank you so much for joining us. With your work at the ILO, you're again working with business and government in the region, not just to prevent forced labour, but also to focus on promoting decent work. Where are you seeing the most progress, and what are some of the biggest gaps in the region?
Thank you, Zarin. And before starting, following my fellow panelists, I want to thank the organizers and thank you for having me in the panel. Yeah, we have seen a lot of progress in the region, in Sri Lanka as well, as other countries, South Asia as well as Southeast Asia. There was, say, for instance, take child labor, for instance, there was 77 million children were in child labor in 2016 in this region. Now it has come down to 48 million, which is a good indicator of the commitment the governments, the businesses, the community is taking, putting into eradicating child labor, for instance. Forced labor, we are still the highest region in the world with about 15 million people in forced labor. But when you take traditional forms of forced labor like, bonded labor, landed indenture type of labor, we are seeing a significant decrease in those forms of traditional forced labor practices as well. Governments are keeping up to their commitment of, signing up to global instruments like, the ILO Convention 182 has been universally ratified. All ILO member countries in this region have signed up to it. So that's a big commitment. More and more countries are signing up to the ILO Protocol 29 on the protocol on the forced labor convention. And then the biggest progress that I'm seeing is coming from the business sector. A decade ago, maybe 15 years ago, when you talk about corporate social responsibility, it was very, very superficial. Businesses would sort of distribute some goodies to an orphanage or go to a school and do some repairs or distribute some school books. No, now businesses have taken it up very seriously, become more strategic, have gained a thorough knowledge of the issue of forced labor, child labor, and also the issues surrounding it, like the economic disparities, the discrimination, etc. And not only that, they are owning the issue, which was a decade ago solely on the shoulders of the government to solve, to address forced labor. Now businesses are owning, not only owning, but they are also taking leadership. They are leading, as we have seen business after business, business leader after business leader coming to the podium, coming to the stage and giving their commitments. In terms of challenges, yes, there is a big challenge in data. There is a challenge in working in isolation, because as much as we say that we need to collaborate, coordinate, when we actually go into real work, we tend to work from purely a labor perspective or a legal perspective or a business perspective. A little more coordination, collaboration is needed. So that's a challenge, how to actually live up to the commitment of collaborating. Then the supply chains itself, as much as it has brought a new perspective to addressing, going to the lowest tiers and addressing the root causes of the issue, there is also an overemphasis on global supply chains at the cost of local supply chains. This is also another challenge that we are seeing, because you see, we are dealing with human rights issues like child rights, the right to freedom. These are issues that cannot be addressed in isolation. You need to address it in a very holistic manner, in integrated manner. It's like, if a pool of water is dirty or muddy, you can't clean up just 1 square meter of water. It's impossible because, it's the more you clean it up, the whole, the water will continue to be polluted. What you have to do is to address the issue in a holistic manner. If the society has child labor, if the society has forced labor, and all the conditions of discrimination and other gaps, how are you going to clean up only your supply chain? It's impossible. So therefore, businesses as well as governments have to take a more holistic issue. I think that is where a big gap exists.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think we've actually seen that reflected in some of the laws that have come in recently, and I'm thinking of the Canadian supply chain law that has come in, where one of the actual requirements in that law is that if you are conducting due diligence, and part of doing due diligence is taking action to remedy, so actually fixing the problem, if you're doing this and you discover child labour in your supply chain, they actually say in the Canadian legislation, you need to think about how your remedy is going to impact the whole family. So if you suddenly say, take all the children out of the agricultural field or out of the factory, how does that impact the family? How does that impact their income? And how are you, as you say, thinking about the holistic solution to that problem? So I think that's a really interesting observation to look at and to think about how that flows into the laws that are coming in. I might turn back to you now, Denver. We've talked a lot about due diligence, and we've talked about how your company takes action to embed due diligence practices throughout your supply chains. I'm wondering if you can make it more practical for us. Can you give us an example of, you mentioned that you use EcoVadis, which is a supply chain tool. Can you give us an example of what might happen if you discover an issue with a supplier? What sort of things would you do to take the next steps?
Thank you, Serena. And, let me begin with a little broader before we get into actually example. I think I would go on the word that the chairman of Capital Maharaja Group gave Shevan, the word opportunity. And if we take that word opportunity and technology, technology has made the world void of geographical and political boundaries. And when you give people those opportunities with diversity and inclusion and equality, digital technology is a great tool that brings that across. With broad-basing those tools and access to information and the opportunities that people have, there is a shift in mindset, shift in values, shift in being able to access information that gets converted to knowledge, and then you are able to make an educated decision. And that's an ongoing journey and a process at different tiers of your supply chain. And when you keep focusing on, for example, even anti-bribery and corruption, working in some of the most toughest geographies, Virtus has offices, 49 or 55 offices in 23 countries. We see diverse things. But if you stick to what your values are, we have not had to compromise. I can assure you hand on heart. Has it been easy? Certainly not. Have we had to pull back in certain instances? Absolutely yes. Was it challenging? Yes. But doing what is right is profitable. It's sustainable. It is future-proof. Now, we take the same message as an example downstream and upstream. And when you bring those values and you explain to your suppliers, this is what is meant, this is why we are paying this price. If not, you will not be able to supply us anymore. That starts changing because it's economics and business being brought in reverse engineering, right? And I firmly believe the corporates have an absolute role to drive this. We can work with blindfolds and think, oh, it's not there. And most would have said, oh, technology, you have nothing to do with, forced labor or anything like that. Of course we have. because we have a supply chain that brings into that. It's ethical sourcing, ethical practices that we bring, right? And the example is when you start asking your suppliers, do you have diversity? Do you have inclusion? Do you have a policy? Can you demonstrate that policy to us? And we have suppliers, of course, we are customers to Google, to Microsoft. They are our customers as well. We are customers to some of the largest and the biggest banks. And this is starting to cascade. And what I'm trying to bring a point is that the overall scheme of doing this is multi-pronged. It's not one or the other. And whilst governments bring in regulations and things which is geographically centered, you have crimes and violations happening void of geographical boundaries that transcend that. And then you need collective corporate power to show that by doing wrong, you will not have a successful business. And that is the message. You have the Unilevers, you have so many others. The problem is huge, but if we don't start chipping at it, it'll never get done. So some of the things that we're doing is even from the tea vendors, the food suppliers, the manufactured goods and services that we get locally. So there is a diversity requirement locally that we put into our policies. So I think corporate policies have a significant role to play in addressing the modern slavery. Also, we have to address the issue what I term as working poverty. Working poverty is the lack of opportunities. And today, we need to enable people to have that. For example, I was listening to some of the previous panelists and the speakers about awareness. Awareness of saying it's wrong, I'm sure none of the people who got on the board thought it was right. But the access to information of saying what are the consequences of doing so, the experiences of that, and where do I validate the information, is this a kosher company or not? Is this a good company or not? And that is where technology comes in with AI, machine learning, and blockchain. Blockchain is a great tool to ensure data validity and credibility that we need. And that data, credibility, and validity will put the wrong guys out of business because they can't hide it anymore, and it'll bring the others. So it's a transformational journey with commitment and passion that we have to drive.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think there's been really interesting developments in terms of using technology in supply chains. For example, using blockchains to verify things like a living wage or whether farmers are paid a fair wage for coffee or other products. So it is a really interesting example for us, not just to think about how it can be, how it's used as a threat, but also something that businesses can use to create more ethical supply chains. So thank you. Kush, I might turn back to you again and to Nepal. Can you share with us some of the risks that workers face specifically in Nepal and some of the actions that NEEC has been taking to protect workers?
Again, I just wanted to highlight again about the business, successful business. It's not the profit maximization. If the profit is linked with human rights, then it can be sustained. So, I mean, there are a lot of consciousness about the global concern about the human rights, which drives for the consumers to be businesses responsible. That's what we are trying to do, ethical business practices in Nepal, where we try to do recruitments and salaries as per the norms of the government rules, ILO conventions. These are what we are trying to do. But although the scenario in Nepal, as we said, employment scenario in Nepal is economic vulnerability is there, occupational vulnerability is there, social and political vulnerability is also there. These vulnerabilities has engaged most of the people, most of the young people has to go abroad for the job seekers because we don't have much jobs in Nepal. That's why we are trying to integrate the system in place from the company so that that company, whoever has given the good job, good employment, and if the employment is good, salary is good, then the people come back. I think 4 million people from Nepal is in abroad, as I said before. And now we are trying to have with the government a budget process, and the business community demands with the government at how we can come back, where we can bring back these people into Nepal. But the economic vulnerabilities in the rural area is much more sensitive, which we are seeing on that one. So how the businesses can go into the rural areas, how we can improve the resource mobilization in the rural areas, how can we can improve the entrepreneurship in the rural areas so that they can engage the rural communities in that same place for job seekers. This is what we are trying to do. But yes, as I said, the vulnerabilities are there is economical, political, society, and people wanted to expect more salaries. They want more. Whatever we are giving to them, that's not enough for them. So if they want more, then they can go outside. Because in Nepal, our per capita income is very low. Our salary base is very low. But as a livelihood in Nepal, that is okay. But people want more. So that kind of sensitivity, that kind of census, how can we turn into the Nepalese perspective so that they can remain in their own place, in their own home. So that's what, there's a lot of vulnerabilities there. In the first session, we heard about this, the worst form of the human trafficking is also engaged in the military, in the Ukrainian and Russian war, right? That's also the cases of Nepal. Nepalese government is also trying to do their level best to bring back these people into Nepal. But they are going there, intentionally going there. It's not like that they are in trafficking, because they want more. They want more salary, good life, whatever the vulnerable jobs are there, but they wanted to go. This mentality has to be changed from the national perspective, from the politicians, from the business people, so that they can come back. This is the vulnerability what we are having. This is the worst form of the human trafficking, what we can say. So NBI and my company, both together, are trying to engage much more people in Nepal in the more distant job so that they can remain in Nepal itself. That's what I think about it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kush. Insaf, I'll turn to you again. You spoke a bit about business and I guess the hope that that's given you in the last few years in seeing the progress that business is making and the action that they're taking. Is there a specific example in our region that you think has been particularly impactful in improving human rights in supply chains, and why did this stand out to you?
Thank you, Sarah. Good question. I think there are a number of examples. We ourselves, with ILO, we have worked with many partners on supply chains, ranging from cotton supply chain to fisheries in Southeast Asia, from the garments, textile and garments industry through our Better Work project, which is present in many countries, then the mica supply chain in India, etc. But let me take an example from a country close to us, which is India, or maybe India and Pakistan. The story begins with one of the leading private sector fashion brands coming to ILO, asking whether we could jointly work on a project to address fundamental principles and rights at work. That is, all the fundamental principles, including elimination of forced labor, child labor, elimination of discrimination, and the promoting of freedom of association and collective bargaining. And now, at this point, we have 5 principles. The 5th one is promoting a safe and healthy working environment. Now, at the time, there were 4. So they came and asked us, whether we could join. We were very happy because normally UN agencies go with proposals to government organizations and other governments to get funds, and then go to the private sector, then go to the the recipient governments to say, okay, can we do this or that? So here, this time it was the private sector, a company coming to us saying, you know, can we work on this? So we said, yes, we will design a project for you for this purpose. Let us work on this. So in India, we chose a state, Telangana, which is slightly bigger than Sri Lanka in terms of population. In Pakistan, we chose the two big states, which is the Sindh and Punjab. We adopted two different models. India, since the institutional framework was very strong, we went through the government, convinced the principal secretary, labor, and then from there, we went to the district magistrates who were the chief government bureaucrat in the district. And then from there, we created a supply of care so that, the government, the establishments, the businesses go to the community, go to the workers, address their issues. In Pakistan, we used another model in the cotton supply chain. We went to the community directly and created the demand, made the community aware that these are your rights. You should not be sending your children to work. They deserve to go to school. You should not be taking advances and binding yourselves to certain cotton farmers. You have the freedom. You are free people. You are workers. You should be collectivizing yourselves, organizing yourselves, and bargaining for your rights. You should not be discriminated because you are a migrant worker and you get less paid less, whereas a person from that locality would get paid more. Or the woman is not even recognized as a worker. It's the man who is the worker, and the woman, although in reality, the woman might be doing more work than the man in the cotton field, the man is the worker and the woman is just helping the husband, right? As well as the children. So we changed those situations. We systematically addressed all these issues. And what happened? The result was child labor was eliminated in those communities. Forced labor stopped. Trafficking was eliminated. Trafficking of in-country migrant workers, that was drastically reduced or eliminated, to the extent that it could not be noticed. Wages went up, not at the cost of profits. It was due to the motivation and increase of productivity that the employers were able to get more profits and they were able to share better wages with the workers, right? So those are the success stories. In India also, one of the trade union leaders was telling us that from 250 Indian rupees per day, the daily wage went up to 450 Indian rupees, and this was both for men and women. They got paid equally, right, according to what they were doing. So the changes were institutionalized because it's not just a project doing something. We work through the institutions, through the trade unions, through the employers' organizations. We bring people together, we bring institutions together. And even after ILO leaves that area, the interventions are sustainable. Why? Because the people own it, the businesses own it, the government also takes ownership of it. So this is a success. I think another reason for the success was the integrated approach, where we addressed all the issues in one go, not isolating child labor or trying to address human trafficking separately, or forced labor, or discrimination. Because if you address one issue, you have to address the others, right? Child labor is there because of structural discrimination, because families don't get paid. It's not an answer to give them an additional income-generating source, to give them some hens or ducks or goats so that they can earn more. No, the first thing is for them to get decent wages, the correct wages, minimum wages. So if they are paid in a decent manner, you can live. I mean, it's their choice to have additional income, but it's not to supplement the gap that the employer is creating by paying less wages. No? So because we addressed the issue holistically, institutionally, I think it became a success story. And now we are replicating it in other states in India and other states, other provinces in Pakistan as well. The experience is available on the internet. Now it's easily identifiable in Google on fundamental principles and rights at work in the cotton supply chain. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that's something that the Bali Process Government and Business Forum could really learn from, these success stories, where in particular you're not just going in and tackling one specific issue, but looking at the problem as a whole and thinking about the intersectionality of the issues, whether that's gender equality, wages, decent work, or the worst forms of exploitation, child labour, forced labour. And I think seeing that as a whole is so critical in terms of addressing those problems in a sustainable way. So thank you very much for sharing that. And we now also have Mr. Isuru Gunaskara, Executive Vice President at John Keells Holdings. So thank you so much for joining us. We've been having a robust discussion about human rights in supply chains. And I wanted to ask you, at John Keells, your company operates across complex supply chains. So how do you ensure that workers are treated fairly and protected from exploitation, both in your own operations, your own employees, and your supply chains?
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, my apologies for the delay. There's a mix-up with the times. Yes, so I think, first of all, if we look at our internal operations, I think that's the easier one to control. And I will break it into 3 areas. One is policy and practice. First of all, at recruitment, all our employees have to go through a mandatory code of conduct training, and that's an onboarding process. Secondly, for all of those who are already in employment, every year it's a mandatory course once again before a performance appraisal cycle. Everybody has to go through the code of conduct training. In addition to that, we have policies and practices in place which cover freedom of association, child labor, forced labor, diversity, inclusion and equity, and a speak-up policy. Now, our speak-up policy then refers to the fact that we have an independent ombudsperson that gets reported on any unethical, moral, codes of conduct breakdowns within the organization as well as outside. And the ombudsperson also reports to an independent, non-executive chairperson who heads the audit committee, which sits outside our own chairperson as well, so that the transparency and the governance framework is outside our framework to maintain that accountability. We also have a direct line for all our employees to the chairperson, which is called Chairperson's Direct, where our chairperson can speak to anybody in the organization, especially with breakdown in code of conduct and ethics. Training, of course, awareness, etc. And sexual harassment committees. We have a zero tolerance on that. And there are different mechanisms in play to make sure that there is clear accountability, transparency, and to avoid re-victimization, which is very important to make sure that people have the confidence that our policies are working. And of course, all of these are internal. The supply chain external is really the challenge because there is less control. But we also work within a very strict guideline of a supply code of conduct, which we make very clear anytime we onboard a supplier that they need to abide by. We also make sure that we have annual refreshers. We do assurances, supplier audits to ensure that those are adhered to. And we also check things like I heard the gentleman talk about minimum wage. Our payments to our suppliers are also contingent on us checking things like EPF and ETF forms and make sure that they have been paid. And if we find that any of our suppliers have not paid statutory dues, that is a reason to hold back payments. So there are certain controls in place. Having said that, I think we all encounter this quite often. For example, security and janitorial services who have, say, 12 hours of work. Whilst they may not go beyond the 12 hours within our perimeters, we find that they've worked 12 hours elsewhere before coming into our organization. So technically, there is a breakdown in the process, whilst we can't control that. But as soon as we find these things out, we try to address it. But sadly, though, this is not infrequent. And this happens quite often, and these are some things that we need to be mindful of. But yeah, I think those are some of the areas if I had to very quickly summarize.
Thank you. I might ask another almost final question for all of you. Well, perhaps starting with the three business leaders that we've got here. I began by talking a bit about the changing legal landscape. We're seeing modern slavery legislation and human rights due diligence laws coming in, particularly in Europe. And I'm curious to hear how much of this is driving change in your own businesses, or how much it's actually impacting the questions you might get from your customers, whether that's as a result of laws in Europe or perhaps sustainability reporting and investor expectations. Is that something you're seeing day to day in your business, or not yet?
May I take that?
Please.
Yes. So when we do RFPs or requests for RFIs from our potential and existing customers, the areas of sustainability, ESG, etc., probably 3 years ago was about 20 or 30, maybe below 20. Year on year, it doubled. And today, I would say the sustainability ESG RFIs, RFPs amounts to about 60% of Virtusa's global revenue. That's a shift, right? So if we don't get our sustainability and our best practices right, 60% of revenue is at risk, right? So I think that is a clear demarcator and an indicator that the businesses have started the shift. Accountability and responsibility is taking priority. Transparency is mandated. And this will only continue to increase. We don't see it going down. And these regulatory mechanisms starts alerting those who were not prepared or who did it as a tick box. Yes, they are having challenges. And we have some of our suppliers there, to his point on security guards being, and why? Because the wages are low. The only way he can earn more is by getting the overtime. So examples, we said, okay, you increase the wages, but you don't send them around. You give our lot, and we will ensure that they get a fair wage. So they don't lose income, neither do they get overworked. So we can't boil the ocean, but we can certainly fix the supply chain's responsibilities to what they do with us. I just get one small example since he brought that up, right? But it still ensures that you're committed to doing the right thing, and you're transparent about it, and it's auditable. In fact, the chair of the Sustainability Committee of Virtusa globally is the chair of the Audit Committee. And the Sustainability Committee has 2 seats for the investor. We are now held by a private equity, 2 seats for them, and the officers of the company. So it's a pretty, authoritative, or has the muscle to make some very, very important business decisions. And what we are doing is not new. Most of the others are doing it as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, if I can add to that, I fully agree. John Keels has quite a few partnerships with global giants like the ADBs and IFCs. And the first 60-70% of the effort that goes into determining whether an investment is going to take place is our ESG performance and our sustainability performance. And it is once we cross those lines that we get into whether the project is financially viable. And our reporting requirements is so stringent on how we handle human rights issues, resettlement, how we manage indigenous people in our properties. If there's a new venture, what's going to happen to the people around that area. These are extremely stringent requirements by these global giants. So it is not a nice to have anymore. If you are to do business globally, it is a must have, and it's not it's an imperative. So clearly we see that pressure and that ask, and it's the right way to go.
I think this is the most important questions which you have said. In the business, customer is the king. If the customer awareness is there, the business can be lined up. They can be responsible. One of the cases in Nepal, a long time back, we had a good exporter of carpets in Germany. So the German customers found that in Nepal, the carpet is weeping from the child. So they banned the importing carpets from Nepal. And there was a one scheme, projects which child labor-free carpets. But unfortunately, carpet is the best quality of carpet in Nepal is the hand-knotted, small hand-knotted carpet, which can be only possible from the small fingers. That means from the child, again. So there's a question whether we should allow a child the working to get the good carpets, or we should ban that carpet which can be weaved from the children. So you should ban the small hand-knotted carpets. So they had some middle point. Okay, you can use the children, and this is the age, but certain time, but you have to give the schools, medicine, also facility for them also. That is a child labor. I think ILO is also engaged in that one to do that one. What I'm trying to say is the customer is the one who is the king, who can decide what kind of goods you're going to buy. And the same way, the industry owes to the customers. Their supply chain, the vendors, they also can say, if you have these kind of activities, low salaries or the exploitation, lower labor exploitation, then I will not buy your products. So these are the things which also have in toolkit of the AAA recommendation in the advancement. That's what I'm saying. Okay, my company is doing good, so I have fair practices, good labor wages. Everything is good into me. But my supply chain has got a bad practices. Then why should I encourage that supply chain, that vendors? This is more important to all of us that we should control that supply chain also, as the customer is the one. And as I said before also, the profit is not only the maximizing profit, but it should link with human rights. Now the whole world is talking about human rights, whether it's climate change or whatever it is, or ESG practice from UN or global compact. All the things comes together to bring you in discipline so that you can encourage the fair practices, fair labor practices. And then that can be reduced, this kind of gray area of human trafficking or labor migration, whatever it is. So I think this question which you have said is a very good one. So to lessons learned to all of us, so do the ethical business practices, good practices for the company, not only you to your supply chain also, as our customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kush.
Thank you. And since I am not a business leader, I might be able to bring a slightly different perspective. See, businesses are customer-driven, yes, definitely. But when it comes to products, yes, customer-driven. When it comes to services. But when it comes to values, there's no need to be driven by anybody else. You yourselves, the businesses themselves can be the drivers, the kings, right? Values are set through passion, through higher norms that we set for ourselves. So we can aim higher by focusing on the values that we promote through our passion. So therefore, we don't need to wait till a customer comes and tells us. At the same time, looking at these laws, the due diligence laws, in the region we observe, yes, some businesses are panicking, denying the issue, trying to hide, maybe like an ostrich, the whole thing is visible, but they try to hide. Some businesses are taking it as a challenge, a bit of caution. Some are taking it as an opportunity. And many reputed good businesses are taking it as an opportunity to learn from others, see how other people are doing things, and then correct their supply chains. But again, going back to the previous question, as a business, why should a law in another country be the one that motivates us to protect our children, our workers, our women, our communities? Why can't we do that out of our own motivation? Should we wait till the European Union come up with a law to make sure that there is equal wages in Sri Lanka or Pakistan or Nepal or India? Why can't we as Sri Lankan businesses, Nepali businesses, Indian businesses do that ourselves? Let's put value on top, right? There is a sufficient international framework. There are conventions. There are rights are clear. So we ourselves take the leadership in our values. And this is what we have seen in progressive businesses, and this is the encouragement that we have. As ILO, we are so happy to see that businesses are taking the lead, not just waiting till somebody else imposes a law and then reactively to react to that. So this is our call. Take leadership, take ownership. Interestingly, yesterday was the World Day Against Child Labor. The world marked a number of events. The slogan was commitment to action, right? Let's act on our commitments. That was the commitment. Last year, on this very same day, I was in Afghanistan. I was addressing the gathering on the World Day Against Child Labor last year. A similar question was posed to me. Child labor is cheap in Afghanistan. So what motivates the business people to employ adults and give equal or higher wages when they can employ children and give lower wages? So my answer was, businesses or business people don't just work for profit. They work for values as well. They work for reputation. They work for legacy. They want to keep a positive legacy. They want to have a name. They want to have recognition, respect in their communities and worldwide. They are not just profit makers. Businesses are leaders. Most of all, in our region, at least in the South Asia region, as well as maybe Southeast Asia, it is also a deeply religious community, whichever religion, there is a lot of religious value that drives the force. And this value can also permeate into the business to make it a higher goal, not just profit. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great note to end on, and I absolutely agree. We do not need to wait for laws to come in, whether that's in Europe or elsewhere. We can take action now. And the international norms exist. The United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights establish that business has the responsibility to respect human rights, every business, everywhere, and every business should be taking action on that responsibility now. But the laws are coming. The laws are coming, investors care, businesses will need to care even more. So yes, I agree, we need leadership, we can take action now, but I think the trends show that this is going to become a major issue for businesses. It does represent real financial and legal risk. And it's exciting to hear about all of the initiatives that you've all shared and the ways that your businesses take action, and also the way that ILO is working together with businesses in the region and creating really sustainable projects. Thank you so much. We've got 1 minute left on the clock. I am going to see if there's any quick questions that people would like to ask before we wrap up. No, in that case, we'll finish there. Thank you so much to everyone. It was great to have the discussion with you.